Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. Today, I'm going to speak with James Riley of JNR Networks. And it's not about growing your business faster or doing this or doing that. It's about, whoa, wait a minute. What about when you're being pressured to grow your business, even if that's going to cost you your marriage and your family? What do you do then? That can be a tough decision for a lot of people. Hear how James made this decision and how it was validated big time 10, 15 years later. You want to find out how and how he made this decision and how it's affected his life? Listen to this conversation. It's a biggie. You'll enjoy it. Let's jump in. Welcome to the show, James. You know, you and I were talking and you said some things. I was just like, wow, you got to be on the podcast. And I guess a starting point is that you heard Arlen Sorensen speak about something, and I heard it, I don't know, maybe decades ago now, because of something Arlen had gone through. And you jumped in with both feet, where I hear a lot of people just do nodding head syndrome, where they say, oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and they do nothing about it. So how do you want to start this story?
Yeah, Arlen brought up this idea of Stephen Covey, right? Begin with the end in mind. And if you're going to go somewhere, you better know where you're headed. And the way he laid it out was he said, we're sitting at your funeral. And what are people saying? And what are they saying about your life? And what really comes to mind is what you need to be focused on. And you need to build a plan and focus and execute to that end. And everything else is a distraction if it doesn't contribute to that. So that's been a big piece of my life, is saying, okay, then what do I want them to say while I'm alive and when I die? What legacy am I leaving behind? And how do I get there? What's that going to look like? And that's given me permission to say yes to a lot of things and to learn when to say no to things too.
So how old were you when you heard this? About what year was it? Do you remember?
This was I was probably about 30 at the time, give or take. 30, 32, somewhere in there. So yeah, that's, I don't know, 15 plus years ago, something like that.
Okay, that's great. And didn't Arlen come to that realization didn't he have a heart problem or a heart attack or something like that? I don't know what it was.
Yeah,
he had something that kind of woke him up. And he's strong today, isn't he?
He still is. Yeah, he's still cranking. I think he's set to finally maybe retire for probably the 5th time, which doesn't really mean he's going to retire. It just means he's going to move to something else. But yeah, he had a heart attack. I think he had some family stuff going on too, just that helped him to realize, hey, I can be driven and grow, and that's good, but I need to do that in a way that's balanced and fits within my purpose and life goals. For me, my faith comes into play with that too. But whether it does or not, that you need to do things in a way that has continuity all throughout, not just be successful in one area while you trash every other area.
Yeah. So you heard this, it really resonated with you. First of all, where did you take that? Did you take that back and kind of go to a quiet place and kind of lay out a plan based on what Arlen had learned and was teaching? And he's a great guy. He's done tremendous things. So I want to talk to a guy who really applied it. And so what was the starting point? How did you kind of sift through that?
The first piece for me was figuring out, what are my priorities? What comes first? What comes second? Because if something comes in the second bucket and it conflicts with the first bucket, I can say no. It's easy. I just say no because it conflicts, and the first bucket's what matters most. And so for me, the way I did it was I just said, okay, my first priority is to honor God above all else. My life mission is to be a man after God's own heart. My middle name is David, after King David. I wish that God would say that of me. Ultimately, that I was a man after his own heart, regardless of how much I screw up. Number 2 is my wife. And so if something comes in conflict and is going to get in the way of that, then I'm going to serve her before I serve the business or my kids or my community. And then comes my kids and my family there. And then comes the business and the community later. And so that helps me have a matrix of priority. As things come in, I immediately slot them among those things and say, okay, how does this fit within that is this in conflict with that? Yeah, maybe I can accept a temporary conflict, but I can't accept something that's going to be a long-term conflict that's really going to compromise something of a greater priority.
So give me an example of one of the first tests of that with your commitment. Because it's a lot of it, a lot of us are great at, okay, I love what I heard that person say, what that person taught, write it out, and then don't really think about it. So
rubber meets the road. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you remember an early test that you had on that really helped you understand, yeah, I can do this and I am going to live by this?
Yeah, I've had multiple, but probably one of the ones that stands out. I was in a peer group, and I love peer groups. They're great, but I was struggling a lot in my business. My wife is involved in our business, and we were having some problems, some struggles, and just in our marriages have. And she was struggling, just sort of growing in the business to lead the way that we needed to be able to grow. And the peer group kept pushing me, said, hey, you need to grow this business. And I said, hey, I've got some problems here. I need to help navigate this with my wife and different things. And there were a few people that came and just said, well, you need to tell your wife to get over it or get out. And you need to grow this business. And if you're not, then you're not serious, and stop pretending like you're serious about running your business. And you've got to be willing to sacrifice your wife on that altar. And I said, wait, hang on. I've got these ranking priorities, and the business is somewhere below my wife. So this is easy choice. And was able to go, no, hey, that's not the direction I'm going to go. I need to, if I want to grow the business, I need to help build my wife up so that we can grow it together, not in spite of her, not without her. So that was a pretty heated test that had a lot of conflict internally and externally that I had to navigate.
Interesting, because probably 30 years ago, there was a small semiconductor company that had a great PR firm, because the leader got a lot of press at the time. But I had a friend of mine, Bob Newell, great guy, devoted guy to God and to family. And he went to an event of that semiconductor company that was like a leadership event. And this CEO showed a picture of his leadership team. It was like 18, 20 people. And he boasted to the audience that every single one of them had divorced their spouse because their commitment to the company was number one.
Wow. Well, I was actually talking to somebody a couple of years ago. We were talking about M&A, and we were talking about these values, and he had exited his business successfully, but also had just gone through divorce, somewhat connected to that. And I said, that I can't remember exactly how it went, but I was saying, that's not where I'm going to go. And he said, well, a lot of money in your pocket makes it a lot easier. And I was just going back to what Arlen said early on of, what are they saying at the end of your life? And I was going, that's not a conversation really about how much money's in your pocket. I don't know. I'm 47 years old. And when I was a teenager, there was a brand of clothing called No Fear. And there was a phrase on one of those shirts that said, he who dies with the most toys still dies. And that still sticks with me.
Yeah. It's true.
It's not wrong to have the toys. It's great. I love it. I've got a few toys myself, and I've got some applications from flying airplanes to scuba diving, but we need to keep those in context, I think.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I think that, I agree with you. Marriage can be tough. And I was married for 40 years and then couldn't make it work. So I ended up stepping away after trying for 40 years. Not going to dive into that. But it's no fun. But if you have a partner who's really willing to work on it, I think it's great to put the effort in. And so one other thing you had that was kind of validation of your decision is you had a surprise health situation a few years back, or I don't know how long ago, but talk to me about that.
Yeah, actually that was, we're October right now. So that was 9 months ago, January of this year, just out of the blue, had a heart attack. And really literally out of the blue, no symptoms. 2 weeks before, I'd been cave diving in Mexico with my wife. And hiking and doing other crazy things, and just out of the blue had a heart attack and ended up having to have double bypass surgery. So got a nice scar on the chest to prove it, and going through some fun or interesting recovery through that.
So you talk about it was out of the blue. If it was out of the blue, how did you find out? Did you just collapse or just, I mean, forgive me, you can stop me if I'm asking too many questions, but.
No, I'm an open book about this stuff, so don't worry. Of all the places I've traveled and enjoy traveling, I do some pretty deep and technical scuba diving. Of all the places in the world I could be, I was laying in bed at home. It was like 11:30 at night, and I just had this pain in the center of my chest. And at first I just thought it wasn't radiating, wasn't going down my arm or anything. I teach first aid, and it just didn't register in the way we talk about heart attacks. And I just thought, yesterday I did a really big upper body workout. It's just muscle pain. I'm being a sissy. But it just wouldn't go away. And I woke my wife up and I said, hey, something's wrong. I'm not sure what it is, but something's wrong. And she said, well, I'm going to take you into the ER. I said, I don't like doctors that much. I said, yeah, I probably should. And so I got up to go get my phone and my wallet, and got dizzy and was sweating like crazy, laid back in bed. And she walked in, looked at me, and she goes, I'm calling 911. I said, you probably should do that. And to her credit, she happened to have and gave me a baby aspirin. And they said that was really the right move for her to do. And they ended up wheeling me over to the hospital. And it wasn't like a rapid onset. They're going to have to do CPR right away, that kind of thing. Cause they didn't even roll me into the cardiac cath lab till like 3:00 that afternoon. But then I was in surgery the next morning, 7 a.m., getting my chest cracked open. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And that was, how old are you now?
46 at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
they said it was, I'm not the smallest guy in the world. And they kept saying, what symptoms did you have? I said, have. And I said, well, I'm fat. And they said, no, you aren't. I said, no, I'm fat. And they said, you're not the kind of fat and the level of fat that would cause this. And it really just comes down that it's a family history thing. And they said, look, if you'd done everything right, you might have delayed this 5 or 10 years, but you were coming in here with this kind of an issue at some point in time.
Yeah.
My biggest takeaway is I was concerned because of the family history, and I'd gone to doctors and said, look, I'm overweight. I need to do something about this. And I need you to look at my blood work, and we need to like dig into this and make sure there's not an issue. And they all just said, oh, you're fine. Go on. I want to go back at him and shake him down and go, hey, I'm not as fine as you said I was. But yeah, it was out of the blue in that sense that I'm very active hiking and diving and doing all these kinds of things. So it was out of the blue in that way.
Yeah. Didn't you just get back from a dive?
Yeah, we were diving, and I got cleared by my doctor, and then a technical diving cardiologist that does technical diving at the level I do. And so I made sure I got good clearance. But then, yeah, we went to Bonaire and did some big deep dives. I culminated that with about a 400-foot dive down to see some old Spanish anchors. So.
Wow. And for those that aren't familiar, where's Bonaire?
Bonaire, it's in the ABC Islands. It's Aruba, Curacao, Bonaire. It's down in the Southeast Caribbean, just north of Venezuela. It's part of the Dutch Netherlands. It's phenomenal for shore diving. It's got a lot of shore diving sites, so you can sort of go at your own pace and drive around the island.
Wow, that's great. So what would you feel you'd like to share about your wife's participation in this journey? I mean, most spouses, I can't think like a woman. Sorry, that's on me. But I can think like a man. And I do know that spouses, a lot of them feel like, hey, I'm not a priority. And I'd like a little more of your time or a little more of your focus. Or I'd like to know I'm a priority. You were clearly trying to do that. I'm sure you were not flawless every step of the way in meeting her expectations. But do you have any comments about what that was like as you're trying to do this together while still trying to take the lead and follow this priority structure that you've set up of following the Lord and then serving your wife and your kids? And and then the community and the business while still maintaining your finances so you don't have that stress level either. So what other thoughts come to mind that were big lessons for you?
I think one of the first ones is that balance doesn't exist. It's a myth. There's no such thing. There's times where you're just going crazy in the business, and you should, and it's right, and it's okay. And then there's times where your spouse or your kid has some major thing going on, and you need to show up and be present. My oldest daughter, she's 18, or when she was 18, she's 25, I think now, with 4 kids. When she was 18, she had a brain tumor. Well, that sort of was a big focus and stole a lot of time from other things to be present and exist there. Whether it was me directly or me creating space for my wife to be present with her, whatever, it was an unbalanced period of time. And I think there's a lot of tension when we try to go after this myth of balance, that in the times that are necessarily unbalanced, we feel like something's wrong. It's not. It's what we're talking about. Balance is more an overall averaging, like what's the mean balance that you have over time? And are you managing that? Within that, I think it's communication and setting expectations. And really everybody, I'm never going to be able to spend as much time with my wife as I would like to, or she would like to. I can never spend as much time with my kids as I wish I could. I can always look back and say, man, I wish I would have spent more time with them, this or that. So you're never going to hit it perfect. You're never going to hit it dead on. And learning to be comfortable with that and with the tension that exists within that, but also not become callous, I think is really critical stuff that I've learned.
Yeah, it sounds like you mentioned it. The communication key is peace. It is critical. So when you go into, let's say, work's going to take over, how do you communicate that to your wife? And I don't know whether a lot of the family's older now. So, but how do you communicate that, set the expectation, and then follow up on that communication? Because not just like, hey, honey, I'm going to be busy. Don't know how long it's going to take. And 3 months later, you come out of it. I mean, so how does that work?
Running a business together, because my wife is in the business and an owner in the business. When it's good, it's great. When it's bad, it's really bad. And one of the advantages is that generally if something starts happening in the business, she understands what's going on, or she's at least tuned in to a lot of the factors that are at play. So that makes it easier that you don't have to sit down and go as deep into some communication at times. But I don't know that I've handled it perfectly. I don't even know it. People talk about crisis communications. I don't know that there's a perfect way to do it, other than sort of what you mentioned, that you've got to sort of go, hey, this is sort of going on. I've got to go do it. And I don't know how long it's going to be. And then somewhere in there coming back and looping back together. But it's because my wife saw that I was willing to back off the business to be present with her, what we have a lot more now is a partnership. And so if she moves this way, I'm able to move and fill the gap. And if I have to move this way, she's able to move and fill the gap. And we don't do that perfect, but because we've been able to show to each other that we're willing to say no to other things and say yes to each other, then we work a lot better in concert together. And there's not the constant conflict of not constantly calling or texting or, all that kind of stuff that sometimes you have, because she's like, oh, you're busy, you're doing something. I get it. So, yeah.
It's interesting. I have a saying that I've learned because too often I've gone in with good intentions, making a decision based on a hoped for outcome instead of the facts. But I love what you're talking about, because what I'm sensing is that you're going in with good intentions, but then it's based on facts, and then you're demonstrating your follow through. I'm not saying flawlessly, or humans, that's impossible.
Yeah.
But you're doing it you're then demonstrating the follow up on those intentions. So I think that's great. I am curious though, talk to me more about where you've struggled with the temptations to work hard, or the pressure, maybe it's not a temptation, but the pressure from like you had in your peer group. Did you stay with the peer group? Did you eventually say, no, this is not a fit? And then, how does that all work? Because you're still positive on peer groups.
Yeah, it wasn't for a while. I ended up exiting. I wanted to exit that group. So I realized that I didn't know what was broken. Was it me? Was it them? Was it everybody? Was it all of the above? I don't know. What I knew was something was broken and it was disruptive to the harmony within the group. And it wasn't, then we weren't able to function as well together. And so I knew I needed to leave that peer group. And I was wanting to stay in a peer group system, but by that time was sort of labeled as being essentially a lifestyle business. And at that time, that wasn't really an acceptable language. I still don't think I'm a lifestyle business, but at that time it wasn't.
Yeah.
And I went into, I don't know, for probably a year or 2 years, I was probably going through a version of depression of what's wrong with me. I mean, like, why can't I get this figured out? That kind of stuff, and just struggling, just not sure about myself, because what's broken in me? Why is it broken? Why can't I figure this out? Why can't I get it done right? And really struggled through that. I think peer groups can be really, really good as long as there's aligned values. If you're going into a peer group and say, hey, the only thing that matters is the business, and everybody agrees, great. And I disagree with that philosophy, but at least there's integrity. There's an alignment. The big issue in peer groups is when there's not alignment, and that can even be managed. I'm in a peer group now, and we've got people of all different kinds of faiths. That's fine. I can talk with somebody who's Buddhist and respect their faith. I think the place that peer groups have an issue, whether it's faith or whatever, is when you start to try to force the other person to be in your world, to only be in your world, where you're not respecting and hearing what their values are. But when a peer group, when you're listening to somebody and trying to help them figure out what their own values are, and then help them align to their values, and saying, hey, this thing you're doing doesn't seem to be aligned with your values, or this decision is coming into a conflict or a balance between those values. How do we help you navigate that? I think that's where it can be really valuable, is when we're doing that. If I'm coming in and saying, here's my values, and now you need to make your decision based on my value set, that's wrong.
No, what I like is that you seem, with your current group, you seem to have agreement that if we're going to be part of the peer group, we're here to help each other grow. So we can speak empathetically, maybe, but firmly with our recommendations that you should consider based on your values and your objectives that you have, that you've told us you want help achieving. But as you say, I love the fact is you're saying, I'm not going to push something on somebody that is contrary to their personal beliefs or their objectives, and put my objectives on them, which is what was happening in your prior group.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was okay for them, but it wasn't a fit. And so I think that's great. And do you have times in your peer group now? I mean, it sounds like it, but just to qualify and maybe how you handle it, but where you agree to disagree.
Yeah. Well, there's times where somebody says, hey, I think you ought to do this. So you go, I see that doesn't align with what I value, so I'm not going to do it that way. But let me consider, the idea there is you go, let me consider what you're saying and where it's coming from, and see how I could use that principle in a way that aligns to my values. And I think a healthy peer group is able to back off and hear that and say, yeah, that sounds like a reasonable approach. Let's give you the space to do that. But then hold you accountable and go, what did you do? Did you actually do that, or did you just throw it away and then just move on? Which isn't healthy either. So
yeah, and that's my experience with relationships in general. Is, if it's a healthy relationship, of course, I'm a high D type A person, so I can handle it, James. If you come to me, I don't know whether you ever have, but you come to me and you say, maybe I put a tremendous amount of effort into something. And then you say, Dave, I appreciate you put in this effort, but I think you're wrong. And here's why I think you're wrong. And I think you should consider that. I want that. Okay. I remember meeting with Arnie Bellini the last time I did, many years ago. And he was really angry at me And he was angry at me because he thought I was diluting my effort. And he was absolutely right. I wasn't mature enough to accept it, the advice. You're trying to be a software company and you're trying to do consulting. What do you want to do, Dave? Stop separating, dividing your effort. Super sharp guy gave me great advice. I wasn't mature enough to accept it. And I don't even know if he had taken a softer approach, if I would have accepted. I don't think I was mature enough. But that's what I've seen in healthy relationships, is that you can bring things up in a empathetic, nice way, and then plant the seed and let the person mull on it. I love that process.
I think one of the keys is that you have an existing relationship. People use political capital. I think that's probably the wrong word, but maybe in the right concept direction. That there's a relationship there that you can, if somebody just comes up to you out of the blue and says, you're wrong, that's a little different than somebody that you know and respect and that they've sat and listened to you and understand what you're doing. And then they come and say that, then there's a relationship that's behind the statement that you're navigating as well. And you could say that's a bad thing. I think it's a valuable thing too, because you understand where that person's heart is, even if it feels like what they're saying stings a bit.
No, and the reason I'm smiling, chuckling a little bit is not because I'm laughing at what you're saying. It's that in the past week, I've had a situation described to me where somebody talked to someone else, or somebody said, yeah, so-and-so talked to so-and-so, and the person he was telling said, well, does that person have a relationship with that person to telling them what to do and what they should think? And the person who's telling the story went, no. So, well, why is that conversation happening? I mean, there's no standing there. They're not in relationship. So it ties in so much in what you're saying. And I was on a phone yesterday with a guy explaining a situation. And I was just saying, this is a tough situation because I hate to see something, not work out for these people. And he said, well, Dave, you got to understand, you got to remember, because it's more of a remember than understand, that giving somebody unsolicited advice when you don't have the relationship will never succeed. And he said, Dave, I'm telling you, it's not 1% success or 5%. It's never. It will never succeed. Is that what I'm hearing you said?
Yeah. And that relationship changes over time. I mean, we're empty nesters. So we've shifted to, well, we have a 16-year-old, but she's moved in to help with our oldest, with their kids. But yeah, as our kids grew and moved out, our relationship changed, and the style with which we provide advice and the style with which we approach things is different, necessarily and appropriately so. And I think that happens in business, that over time, those relationships evolve. I won't say they mature, I guess, but they evolve because where the other person is, where you are, the context of your relationship shifts over time too.
Yeah. So let me ask you another question. You talked about that you do certain exercises and you hike and you do some things. You also are disciplined in business. We haven't gone into that. But let me go back to this thing of having your priorities. And you also mentioned your faith, where I'm sure there's a certain schedule or routine there. But talk about these priorities, because as I recall, Arlen had a certain process to follow to help you stay true to your priorities and develop habits that would support your pursuing those priorities. What do those look like for you, James?
Internally, we've adopted a modified version of EOS as far as just building a plan and then executing consistently on that plan. But for us, before we even get there, we always back up and say, what are our values and what's our mission? What are we here to accomplish? And then what's the delta? Where are we deficient in doing that? Or how could we do better and more of that stuff? And then we build a plan on that. And yeah, we're using a modified EOS approach to that. But there's StratOp, there's a number of other ones out there as well that people are using with varying levels of success. But I found having some kind of a structured system, even if you're making it up on your own, at least you have something. Probably one of the biggest things I've learned about that is do something and then adapt within it. I mentioned I teach first aid, and when we teach CPR, we were finding that we were making it too complex to do CPR, because it was how many 15 to 1 or 30 to 2, all these different counts if anybody's done compressions to breaths and stuff like that. And they finally said, yeah, stuff doesn't matter as much as we thought it does. Perfect care, and the statement is perfect care delayed is worse. Actually, the other inverse is imperfect care delivered is better than perfect care delayed. And so we learned that in life-saving, but we've seen that in business a lot of times, that sitting back and building a perfect plan, first of all, it's not perfect. It never will be. That's a myth. Sitting back and trying to do it, you remove the ability to learn as you do it and to be more agile. And so within that, I guess, and you mentioned software company, we've adopted a more agile approach where we start going and then we say, well, that didn't work. Let's adapt over here. Or, that was a good idea, but the implementation really sucked. Let's make this happen. But to do that, we've had to set that culture within our team that failure is actually an indicator of success instead of an indicator of failure. And so it's been a culture shift too.
If people are willing to own the failure or mistake, learn from it. But that talks more about the business. Let me talk about James. So with James, how do you hold yourself accountable? What type of schedule do you have to kind of do a check-in on your own, by yourself, with the Lord, or on your own, or both, of saying, you know, these are my values, or these are my priorities. How am I doing?
For me, it's a daily devotional time. And to be really honest, I've struggled with that one, really nailing that one down. And the reason was I couldn't find a good way that worked for me to build a system around it. And so it was one of those things that I didn't have on my calendar, didn't have it locked down, and really couldn't hold myself accountable. And I've changed that. I've actually started putting it on my calendar. And for me, the calendar is a big key. Is I put workout. I went hiking this morning and it's on my calendar. I've got to work out sometime today. It was supposed to be right after my hike, but I said, no, I can't do that. But the accountability is I can't just delete this. I've got to move it somewhere. And so for me, that's been the thing that really helps me stay accountable, because my day flexes. And I was running into this thing. It's like, I couldn't always every day at this time, always do this. And so my day flexes. So I've just put blocks on my calendar and given myself permission to move them, but that I'm accountable. And then I've also given myself permission that some days stuff is going to happen and something's got to get deleted, but that's an accountable action. I am choosing to not do this today.
Yeah, it's intentional. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think also the quote unquote failure piece, I think, is really valuable. It's, for me at least, a lot of times if I would miss something I said I was going to do, I would go into a spiral and go, oh, well, then why am I doing it at all? And I just stopped doing the whole thing. And instead of giving myself permission that, hey, you're going to miss a workout on occasion. That's okay. You're not going to get 10,000 steps a day today. You're not going to get your daily devotional time because something happened, because your wife needed to talk or your kid was going through something and you needed to talk. And give yourself permission that those things, you don't want to make it the norm, but you have to give permission that sometimes that's being adaptable. It's being present. Because the other thing is, I was getting so rigid that people would say, hey, I need you. And I go, too bad. I've got to go do a workout. And I can't do that every day, but allowing myself to give some flex and adaptation, I think, is valuable.
So based on all the people you've interacted with in your life experience at this time, what's one key piece of advice that you would give to close out this conversation that we haven't covered? Or if you feel it's so important, repeat something that you've already said.
I think we've already talked about a few things. I think probably the biggest one for me is learning to ask questions that you don't know the answer for and that you acknowledge may not even have an answer. Okay. It forces me to stay humble. It forces me to stay curious. I can still stay driven, but it forces me to not always be driven to a definitive result. Sometimes it's more about the process than the result. So for me, probably one of the biggest things I've learned on top of some of the other stuff we talked is learning to ask questions you don't know the answer to and acknowledge there may not even be an answer.
Or that it's something for you to ponder and maybe work it your own way. It's either a new seed that's planted or a seed that gets watered, but it doesn't need an instantaneous decision. It's just new information that you can consider and compare to your current knowledge, skills, and life experience. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah. I'd say sometimes you ask a question and you go, man, I don't know if I know how to come up with the perfect answer here, but I'm going to choose this answer for now, and I'm going to move forward. And then but I'm going to leave the question open for evaluation and continue to learn. And as that seed germinates and it grows and matures and goes through a cycle that your answer can and will and should change. And that takes a lot of humility that I'm still working on figuring out. But I don't even know that I fully know how to articulate how valuable and why it's so valuable. But it's something my dad sort of introduced me to as he's questioning, learning, growing, and has been really valuable for me to learn to be uncomfortable and to learn to enter into spaces where I don't have to have the answer right now.
Yeah, but you are still guided by the answers that you have defined for your values and your priorities. And so that really seems to drive you, if I've heard you correctly. And I think that one of the messages I'd like the audience to get from this podcast, which I didn't have in mind when I asked you the earlier question, is that you do need to really think those through and define what your priorities are, and then work on how you're going to develop that into a habit where you're going to process information and opportunities against those priorities. Like you've said, I can't, with your peer group, well, yeah, I would like to grow, but I can't grow because then I'm going to sacrifice my wife and my family. So that's very important. And a lot of people have more difficulty than you did in making that decision.
It wasn't easy. It was a lot of angst, but yeah, having that clarity of where we're going, or at least what the direction we're going to is, I think is absolutely critical. And you're right, even when we don't have an answer to a question, we have a set of guiding principles that give us a direction, but maybe not a conclusion. I think that's probably more what I'm saying is we still have direction. We aren't aimless, but we can acknowledge that we don't know what the end result exactly is. We just sort of know the direction we're going towards it.
Yeah. Well, that's great. You're talking to us about life experience today. You don't have a product or a service or something, but if somebody wanted to get a hold of you because of what they're trying to learn in life or learn more about your company, where would they go, James? Just LinkedIn the best or somewhere else?
You can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn, James Riley, Riley, or you can email me, james@jnrnet.com. Be happy to chat and learn from each other.
Sounds great. Hey, thanks for your candor today. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you came on. I think this is a wake-up call for some people that are working too hard and wondering, what am I doing this for? Or seeing things collapse in other areas of their life. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.